Very recently, the government have handed down to judges the fact that they should be more lenient when it comes to prison sentences. You know, my solution to us not having any prison spaces left is just simply to build more prisons, you know, because this is not just about the assailant and how we treat them in society. It's about the protection of the victim. It's also about justice and justice being seen to be done. But Leroy, you can sympathise, I think, for the public where they're sitting there on social media, watching the news, reading their newspapers, seeing that on the one hand, we've got the police standing idly by, not dealing with aggressive anti-Semitism in the centre of London on a Saturday when Palestinians are protesting, for instance. And then in sharp contrast, they get burgled, they get their house broken into, or indeed they witness a shoplifting, or indeed they might be a shopkeeper themselves, and the police simply don't turn up. And then they see people like Lawrence Fox, for instance, that has 6 police officers turn up to his house to arrest him for saying something that might be deemed to be slightly offensive. Do you see why the public might not have faith in the police service anymore?
Absolutely. I mean, there we have another issue. You know, social media can spin things so it distorts things in a way that really you think, are you getting the full picture? And I'm not in any way discounting people's grievance when they're thinking, well, officers seem to be soft on public order offences and policing Palestinian marches and so forth. I'm in no way trying to defend being, you know, inconsistent. But I know officers are finding it really tough to police these protests because people who are protesting know how to bring it right to the border of where it goes over into an offence. So there is.
But Leroy, sorry, they didn't when it was anti-lockdown protesters. Leroy, sorry, they didn't when it was anti-lockdown protesters. They don't when it's football hooligans. They don't seem to worry about going into a crowd of 10,000 people and putting hooligans out. So what's the difference between policing a crowd of Palestinian protesters at Trafalgar Square versus thousands of anti-lockdown protesters 3 or 4 years ago? Because it does seem, and it's true, it's a fact, that we now have a 2-tier policing system.
Well, I would never agree to that, and I don't think there's evidence to prove that. But I think it's around how officers need to be fully aware of their powers and how to deal with these things. A lot of legislations come rushing through, and I know, if you remember when the King's coronation and how they rounded up 18 suspects, kept them in for almost 20 hours, and there was no charges. In the end, they had to apologise and maybe compensate them. So I know that officers, even senior officers, are not as sure on the legislation or how it's going to be interpreted by the courts. So I'm not saying they're intentionally being soft on Palestinian protesters.
Well, maybe they're just being political,
and hard on others.
Maybe they're just being political.
Let me land by saying that a lot of it is around how this is interpreted by the courts. And a lot of it is new. A lot of this legislation is new. I'm not giving officers an excuse, but the number of things that have been brought in and changed and dispensed with is a very, very tough thing. I know what it's like when legislation comes rushing in and you've got to act on it. And a lot of it is trial and error.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, what Russell was saying there, because I was on the talk the other evening and we were being told by some people that the police are now really woke. And I was thinking, this is so counterintuitive to me. I grew up being told that the police were right-wing by their very just by dint of them being police. They were definitely not woke. And now they're all woke, apparently.
They're not. They're not. I mean, this is where false narratives and fake news take hold on social media and other platforms, and you think to yourself, come on.
Yeah.
Listen, I've done police training in the North East Command. I'm working with borough commanders. That culture has not changed. It is a right-wing leaning culture, and it's attracting those sort of people.
Yeah.
So to say that they're being woke really is totally inaccurate. And I don't think many people know what woke means.
Good to know. Well, Leroy, I do want to talk about social media just very briefly, though, because do you think social media has made policing very much harder?
100%. I mean, I've been out policing 10 years, and social media was just starting to bubble up, and you started to see a lot of cybercrime coming through social media, and those softer crimes, i.e., someone's not getting full frontal of that offence, whether it's a burglary or a robbery or a motor vehicle crime, whatever. It's not straight in their face. So the subtleties of social media and the offences, again, is being very personnel intensive. A lot of personnel hours are used trying to investigate this. And one of the other things is disclosure. Officers now, if they're dealing with any suspect, a lot of the times they have to show their mobile phone use, how they're using social media, because that's all part of the disclosure picture. Those IT-based evidence has expanded exponentially. So officers are now dealing with really complex cases, and some of them are very inexperienced. I remember as a sergeant, I'll be dealing with burglaries. Now we see trainee investigators dealing with burglaries, and some of them have got some real IT dimensions to it that it makes it very, very challenging. So policing is not an easy one.
Yeah, I was actually just going to, sorry to interrupt, Leroy, but I was just going to say, you're talking about that, and I was just wondering whether if you were suddenly in charge of the whole thing, would you actually ring-fence the cyber crimes and actually give that to people who are IT savvy and actually kind of almost siphon that off as almost a completely different thing, because it's a very different skill set, isn't it?
Yeah, I know the National Crime Agency do a lot of that. And I know some of it is outsourced from police services across the country to specific IT experts. So just like finance crime, they outsource some of that to financial experts. So there needs to be, I think, beefing up of the outsourcing. But you have to have good organizations. And I wouldn't be surprised if AI can help out on this. Watch this space. You heard it first here. I think AI can be a real assistance when it comes to an investigative tool, just like you've seen it improving in medicine and in science and somewhat in education. I think policing can be improved by AI. And not to substitute officers, but to be an assistant, especially around the investigation, because there's such a raft of things they've got to bear in mind, especially around social media-based crimes, and they need as much assistance as possible, because the cases are not going to decrease, they're still going to be increasing.